This is Pastoring in the Digital Parish, your resource and point of connection for building digital ministry strategy and bringing your congregation into the digital age. Hi there, my name is Ryan Dunn. I'm the proctor for this podcast, which seeks to be the digital ministry class that you just didn't get in seminary. Last season, we did an episode outlining 10 recommended books for digital ministers. One of our most frequently recommended books is called The Art of Community, and it's by Charles Vogl. And it provides 7 principles for nurturing well-connected and meaningful communities. And that book was released in 2016. And as you know, the world was just a little bit different back then, both politically and also in terms of the ways in which we come together in community. We weren't quite so digitally dependent in those days, if you'll remember. So I thought it would be cool to revisit the things that Charles wrote about with Charles and see what updates he had for the art of community post-pandemic and how he sees his principles translating into digital spaces. So in this session, we discussed the need for intellectual, emotional, and action components in spiritual communities, no matter how they meet. And Charles also emphasizes the importance of intimacy and vulnerability in creating meaningful digital experiences. And here, Charles delivers some cautionary warnings about building digital communities, notably that it takes longer to build intimacy in the digital realm. Though, if you've listened to other episodes of this podcast, then you've likely heard me opine that the big benefit of digital is that it allows us the access to invest in being with people. It's 24/7. Anyways, we also look at the loneliness epidemic in America and how organizations can deliver on the 3 promises of community events to promote growth, connection, and freedom of choice. Before we get to this very interesting conversation with Charles Vogl, let me tell you about another key factor for forming community: safety for the most vulnerable. Safe Sanctuaries, Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. So to learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or just give them a call, 800-972-0433. All right. Let's get to know a little bit about our adjunct professor for this session, Charles Vogl. Charles is an advisor, a speaker, and the author of 3 books, including the international bestseller that we've already talked about, The Art of Community. Drawing on 3,000 years of spiritual traditions, Charles teaches the wisdom and principles to build deep community and resilient relationships that foster innovation and integrity within organizations like church. He holds an MDiv from Yale, where he studied spiritual traditions, ethics, and business as a Jesse Ball DuPont Foundation scholar. His work is used to advise and develop leadership and programs worldwide within organizations including Airbnb and LinkedIn and Twitch and Amazon and Meetup.com, Wayfair, the U.S. Army, so much more. So let's get talking to Charles Vogl next. Charles, it's fun piecing together a bio for you because you've lived into so many different roles. So you're an author, you've been a filmmaker. It sounds like, if I'm piecing this together right, you were involved in campus ministry at some point, and there was time in the Peace Corps. So I'd just love to know, what role are you trying out right now that you're excited about?
Well, it's a very exciting time for my work. Unfortunately, the reason it's exciting for me is there's a lot of pain out there. So at this particular place in my life, and if you ask, we can talk about how I got here. I'm working with organizations that reach out to me to help develop leadership to get better at connecting the people that are important to them, the organizations, around shared values and purpose. And overwhelming, that's organizations that care about either some kind of performance. It may not necessarily be commercial, but they need to be successful at high stakes activities. And obviously when teams are more connected, that's important. And then when I'm approached by people in education, there's a deep concern about the disconnection among students, administrators and faculty and parents all throughout the education system, and we can talk specifically about the pain there. And the reason I say it's unfortunate that it's exciting for me is that we are now living in what the research undeniably reveals to be the loneliest era of American history. And we've been on a very steady decline of connection now since at least the 90s, when Robert Putnam out of Harvard wrote a book called Bowling Alone, alarming Americans that we are losing our connection. And just this season, as you and I are talking now, our current Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, is on a media tour sharing that for his office, loneliness, the loneliness epidemic, is the number one priority for his office because of its threat to the health to America at several different layers. So it's very exciting for me to have something to say and make a difference when there's so much pain. I wish it were different.
Yeah. But we understand where you're coming from in saying that you're able to add something proactive and helpful into these conversations about loneliness. What are some of the symptoms that are being proclaimed about this epidemic of loneliness?
Well, I'll just interpret your question when you say, what are the symptoms? Unfortunately, I looked at the latest research because I'm writing a paper right now. And the latest research indicates, Ryan, believe it or not, half of Americans do not have 4 friends. And that sounds bad. It's actually much worse than that, Ryan. 49% of Americans have 3 friends or less. About 1 in 6 of Americans has no friends. The specific numbers are 13% of Americans have no friends, and 15% of American men have no friends. So when you and I go into anywhere, and I know we were talking about ministry, you and I earlier, if we go into any room of people who darkened the door of a house of worship, we're not far off if we point at half of those people and they do not have 4 friends to call upon if they get a bad diagnosis, or they need to move, or they need a ride. And that's just half of America. And then my understanding is less than 15% of Americans have 10 friends or more, right? So if you live in a city and you move cities for a job, you may not even have had 10 friends in the old city, and then you have less friends in the new city, and that has profound implications on a number of things in our lives, but certainly one of them is our resilience to respond to change, work change, economic change, political change, like whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, that sets the table for what we need to do, both in ministry and just in community building in general, and in being able to draw people together. There is, in fact, a real need for that. In the community building work that you've done, especially recently, you've used words like branding, which can be offsetting for some reason to people within the ministry world or the church world. So can you help us take some of the fear out of branding and just understanding why it's so important for building community?
So I'm glad you asked. Specifically for this reason, and let's be really clear, Ryan, I am not a marketer. I have never been a marketer. I don't pretend to be a marketer. When I talk about brand, I'm talking about something very, very specific, and that is simply the promise an identifiable organization makes. If I join a Dragon Boat Society, their brand is a promise that if I get involved with them, I'll meet people who race dragon boats, and I'll find an opportunity to race dragon boats. It's as simple as that. And when we
That's very specific. Are you involved? Are you actually involved in?
Well, I'm Asian American. I live in the East Bay, and we have a Dragon Boat Society in the area. A lot of Asian Americans have moved to Northern California. And I know that when the book first came out, my book was embraced by a community there that was coming together around shared values and purpose in the area. But my point is, it has nothing to do with selling more stuff. Now, obviously, if we have a promise of value, people hopefully will find us because they want the thing. And if it's a ministry context, if you're trying to find a ministry that speaks to families with young kids who want to be educated in a certain faith tradition, then there better be a promise of value there. Otherwise, you're not going to find them and you're certainly not going to stay. Right. So, and most organizations are promising some kind of value, whether they know it or not. Right. And if you haven't named it or you haven't thought it through, then you're hoping you get lucky, right, when the people you're looking for hear about you or show up. And that's all I mean by a brand in my work. And then my work, we use the term community very specifically, and that is a group of people who share mutual concern for one another. And Ryan, if there's a group of people and you don't share a concern with them, you're probably not in a community with them.
Okay.
And we can talk more detail about what communities have, shared values, shared purpose. Usually people are growing together in some way. But nonetheless, the foundation is, hey, do you care about each other? So when we talk about brand community, all we're talking about is some organization that promises value, and that can be ministerial, right? Not all ministries minister in the same way to everybody, and if they try, good luck with that. And then are the people involved in your ministry finding experiences that are leading them to create the relationships where they care about other people in that ministry, and are those experiences helping them understand that people care about them? And unfortunately, Ryan, as I literally travel the country talking about this, I find that people are spending a lot of time and a lot of money trying to create a lot of experiences that don't deliver any of that. And it's unfortunately because they're often trying to brag figuratively or literally how many people showed up to get pizza. And focusing on how many people came to get pizza is very different than when Ryan showed up. Did he find the things that let him understand there are people who care about what he cares about and will care about him or does care about Ryan at some level?
All right. Yeah, that is very helpful because we tend to graft onto this idea in church world that our brand is related to kind of the power numbers, as you talked about. That we are the big church. We are the church with X and X kind of worship. Whereas what you're really talking about is what kind of relationship value do you offer to people? So we might want to define ourselves in terms of saying something like, we are the church who cares for this neighborhood. Or, does it seem like that's on the right track?
Neighborhood churches have a long history that goes back, I'm guessing, at least 1,000 years. Maybe actually meaningfully more than 1,000 years. So I'm not knocking that. I think when I talk to ministers, usually they're focusing on speaking to some kind of demographic. I have friends who literally have billionaires in Connecticut in their ministries, and my church is in East Oakland, California. And I promise you, those ministries look very, very different, as they ought to. Yeah. Right. And it'd be pretty silly to say, well, our church is for everybody. Is it? Will those programs work in East Oakland and they're going to work in Western Connecticut the same? It's just ridiculous. Right. So there's some, if you will, boundary of who we're seeking to participate. And that can be self-selected, but nonetheless, there's a boundary.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit in setting up boundaries, because we are resistant oftentimes within churches because we don't want to feel exclusionary. And we hear that is one of the gripes that people have about the spiritual, not the spirit, but the religious world in general, right? Is that it's very firm as to who's in and who is out. So when you're talking about boundaries, is that what you're trying to define?
I think it's just the opposite. I think there's denial about who's in and who's out. And, my favorite thinker about the failure of 20th century American religious landscape failing to serve at least Gen X and down is Diana Butler Bass. And, one of the things that she says is there's a value set in the ministries that were formed in the 20th century that just don't apply, we'll say broadly, Ryan, in the 21st century. And, one of those is righteousness and fairness. And I think there's a broad swath of American Christianity that says we know what is right, full stop. And in a world that's changing as fast as ours is, is in cultures that are so cosmopolitan, as certainly our mega cities are now, in places where what was considered fair and honest commercial practice in the 1980s that people would be embarrassed to admit they're participating in now, right? I think that doesn't hold water anymore. And so if there's this pretension that says we know who's in and who's not by the standard, and then people don't fit, and you say, oh, but we're for everybody, well, now it's very confusing. And, with that said, my understanding is whenever we start a ministry, there is some vision of how we want to enrich people's lives if they spend time with us, right? And by the way, they spend time with us and they have no interest, right, in enriching their lives that way, right, then they really shouldn't be there. Said differently, Ryan, so I have a young son and I'm a member of church in East Oakland, and we are participating in the parents group. If you show up and you don't have kids and you're there to get real estate leads for your real estate business, this is not the place for you to be. It's not a matter of saying, well, maybe Ryan will get better if he hangs out with us. Well, I'm showing up as a parent who got through a pandemic in a two-income family in a rapid inflationary environment, right? And I don't really want Ryan to show up and be pitching me real estate leads, when I'm coming to meet. My point is there's a boundary. There's some point where Ryan should not be coming to those sessions.
Mm-hmm. No, okay. All right. Perfect sense.
Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Very valuable. And we talked a little bit about the audience that we're speaking to here. And in a sense, you've been surprised that you haven't had more of an interaction within the religious community around these principles of community building. And it's surprising to me as well, because as you've just intoned, you speak the language, it's there. So let's dive into that language a little bit. Talk to us about theories like head, hand, and heart. Like, what does that have to do with community building?
Well, that's a more advanced idea, Ryan, which we can dive in. I just don't want to leave people behind.
Okay.
I don't remember right. I believe I read it. Wayne Teasdale wrote in The Mystic Heart in the 1990s about this idea, and I'm certain it's coming from older source material from him, but this is where I encountered this description. In one way, we can describe some through lines when we look at very, very old spiritual traditions that have stayed together for hundreds and in many cases over 1,000 years. We notice there are activities that speak to the head, hand, and heart. What I mean is there's the intellectual stuff, and we could say in ministry, like, you need to know the canonical works. You need to know the relevant theologies. You need to know the relative histories, and maybe even you need to be able to speak on the debates around those. And if you can't, you don't know enough about the community to participate fully or have perspective. Fair enough. There also needs to be the emotional component, the heart component. It can't just be a bunch of people debating, 3rd century theology and, how right or wrong were the Crusades. Like, that is not a healthy ministry, right? Or spiritual community. So we need to look, what is going on here that's speaking to the emotional needs and experiences of participants? Ryan, music is a big part of that, right? Music, certainly liturgy, brings a lot of emotion. Other things, including music, but certainly that's a role that music brings. And then the hand, there needs to be an opportunity to take action. In fact, I already referenced Anna Butler Bass once. One of the things she referenced is missing, or there's not enough of it in 21st century American religion, is action. We are not okay just watching. Showing up on, be it a Sunday or a Wednesday evening, and watching someone do a liturgy ain't going to cut it, in broad strokes. And this, Ryan, in ministry, parishioners or participants, they need to do something together. Cook a meal together. Go do a service project together. Go walk a mountain. Do something together. And so when we have a fairly mature community, we have people showing up. We know why we're showing up. We know why we want to grow together. We have a general sense of in what ways people want to grow, right? we need to be looking at what we're inviting people to do and make sure we're inviting them to do things that cover all three. And what I often see is ministers get stuck in what they feel good in. So it's all head, or virtually all head. Or maybe they really like the music and it's all music, which is great, but at some point it's just empty fun time.
Yeah.
Or they say, let's go volunteer and do mission projects, but it's not rooted in a theology or rooted in a cosmological understanding on what makes mission projects worth doing. And how are we doing this in a way that isn't just extending more colonial power, patting ourselves on the back on a 2-week vacation, declaring ourselves good, and then leaving the very orphans, we've declared in need. So my point is, in a mature way of shepherding community, all three of those areas need attention.
Okay. Where we sit in much of church practice right now, when it comes to ministry in digital spaces, is that we get stuck on one particular aspect, just like you talked about, that we might be locked in like, oh, we can teach people things online, but we can't engage them in the hand or heart practices. So are there ways that you've seen some digital communities coalesce around all three practices? Are there ways that they are engaging people, not just in the informatic kind of headway, but also in the hand practice and engaging in the heart?
So, I have anecdotes here and there, Ryan, but let me just say, broadly speaking, I think people, in broad strokes, people who are trying to bring together communities either entirely online or almost entirely online are largely failing. And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there. There's a lot of bragging about how great it is, and the experience is not that great. And I know this is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way because they want to go brag about it. But let me just give you some numbers the research shares us and like why I'm saying that. So we know that it takes, I'm going to say dozens of hours to make a friend. I won't give you a specific number because I'm certain there's a bell curve there, and I didn't make this up. My favorite researcher on this subject is Marissa King, who until very recently was at Yale School of Management, and she's now moving to Wharton. So we know it takes dozens of hours. We also know that it takes 5 times as much time to build that relationship digitally mediated. So you and me, Ryan, over video calls are going to take 5 times the amount of time to make that friendship than if we went camping for, one day and a night together. Okay. Here's what's also true, Ryan, is if I invite you to my home for dinner from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock on a Friday, you might say yes. You might even enjoy it. You might even want to come back. But if I say, Ryan, hey, let's get on a video call this Friday from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, you're going to laugh out loud. And the reason is because that's not fun.
So do you see then within these developing communities that you've working with, are they using digital in addendum to kind of the embodied presence?
Yes. If they're doing anything well, then the digital is about creating connections between in-person experiences. Okay. And I'll just share one of the ideas that I share widely to new people who are following my work. We know that people connect in what we call intimate experiences. And for the purposes of programming, that means groups of 5 or smaller. And sure enough, Ryan, when you go to a big concert or you go to a wedding, you don't find yourself actually talking to 9 people at a time. And if you did, after 2 hours, that'd be exhausting. What really happens is you find 5 people or less to have an intimate conversation. And the same rules apply online. So that if I have a group of 24 or even 100 and I want them more connected, I need to create a series of experiences. We call them campfire experiences in my teaching because they simulate a campfire-like conversation that have some characteristics that are intimate. And if I can create those with enough frequency and I can create a container where there can be possibly vulnerable conversations, we start getting those friendships. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes time.
Yeah. Okay. And it sounds like intimacy in terms of, well, maybe this is where we go back to the boundary thing, but a created sense of intimacy through a boundary of kind of limiting the participants.
Well, we need to understand, and this is important, we as participants need to perceive that there's shared value and purpose. And maybe the value is help other parents raise healthy families in a world upended by a pandemic. Like, that totally counts. But if somebody shows up and they're just, maybe they have kids, but they're really here to build their real estate leads, they're not sharing the value of the gathering, right? And the reason I say perceive, Ryan, is it may be that we're surrounded by people who share our values and purpose, but we don't get the data that tells us that. So let me give you an example. Let's pretend you show up at a conference. You got kids, Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, let's pretend
15-year-old son. Yep.
Fantastic, a teenager. You show up at a conference, and you're going to hear the world's greatest speaker on raising healthy teenagers in an era where we know social media is toxic. Okay, and let's pretend you drove an hour to get there, got there early so you wouldn't be late, and you're in the third row, and you're 20 minutes early.
Okay. I'm invested, though. I'm in.
You're in. Yeah. You're in. And let's pretend there are 40 other people who got there early, and you're all sitting around with your phones open reading the paper. You're not getting any data from them that they share your value and purpose, even though you might spend the better part of an hour in that building surrounded by people who care about this subject, are willing to drive and find parking, and invest their time to get better at this. And if we, as an organization, had made that experience so that you connected with them and level to understand that, boom, your level of perception of connection would have gone up, even though it's the same people in the same room. And that's what I find at a lot of ministerial events. They're really good at setting up the coffee. They're really good about putting out the pastries. They're really good about making sure there's enough napkins. But the experience of it is equivalent of you in a room surrounded by people who share your values and purpose, and there's no context to let you understand, oh, these are the people I want to be around.
Yeah. And that speaks to me on a personal level, in that the experience that you just described is terrifying to me. Even though I'm a leader in the church, right? But there's nothing more pressure packed for me than that moment on, say, a Sunday morning when it is just what you described. Like, I'm going to stand around with people who I know on some level and drink some coffee, but without that called attention, I'm dying. I'm struggling.
Here's the thing, Ryan, is we can learn these things. And that's why I do this work. And the fact that we know that there's pain out there, and I'm sure because you're in ministry, people don't accidentally find themselves in a house of worship when they could be watching Netflix or reading the New York Times, right?
Yeah.
Something inspired them to be there. And the fact that they're showing up, you're around them, and it's terrifying to you is an indication that there's a lot of learning we can do so that we can be that catalyst to tap into all those things that brought those people to stand in that room with us, because none of them are here by accident.
Well, so in that particular situation, what might be step one to be that catalyst?
So I'm happy to mention things, Ryan, here. I just don't want to treat this like it's a series of tips, right?
Sure.
It's like raising kids, right? Oh, how do you get kids to go to bed on time? How do you get kids to not get drunk on Fridays, right? Look, we can talk about that, but let's not treat it simply. And, the great thing about having this time with you is we want others to know there are ways to learn this and they can go deeper. But I'll just give you one idea that I can't believe isn't everywhere. Name tags, Ryan.
Okay.
They're almost free, and almost everyone I know knows their name. But if you're a minister or it's your second time at a program and you've shown up on Sunday or Wednesday night, right, or Saturday evening, and now the names of the first 12 people you met are on their chest, we've really lowered the bar. And yet I find a lot of resistance to put the dang name tag on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, I had a conversation this week with a pastor of my church that said, seriously, now that the pandemic has ended and we're trying to build up attendance after closing our doors for a couple of years, what's it going to take to get name tags on? Right? Seriously. So that would be like the lowest bar of entry. Another one is your ministry needs to know who are the elders in the program. And elders just means people who are more familiar with the program, who understand the values and the purpose of it, and they have the ability to welcome people in, right? If I show up to your ministry next week, I don't know people, I don't know what you do, I don't know the history, I clearly don't have that power. I certainly don't have that authority. So you're going to want to have elders that are not just you, Ryan, who understand part of my role as an elder is to be the gatekeeper into this community. And if we look at very old communities in spiritual traditions, there are always several rings of seniority. And the rings aren't there to snob out the lower rings.
Yeah, I do want to unpack that word gatekeeper a little bit. And that you're not meaning like, hey, there's somebody who is literally trying to keep people without of the gate, but a gatekeeper is more of a person of hospitality. Okay.
Well, the gatekeeper helps people cross the gate to be connected.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in that room where you're paralyzed, if you know there are 5 of you and you have name tags on, and everybody else has name tags on, and you're aware people are showing up because they understand this thing is happening here, it's for parents, right? Then when you engage, there's a conversation you can have with everyone that helps them understand that you see that they arrived, you understand what inspired them to show up, otherwise in the wrong place, right? And that you understand that they want to grow in some way. Right. Because for every community event to be successful, we have to deliver on 3 promises. And these 3 promises exist whether you know it or say it at all. 3 promises are there. You have to deliver them. The first one is there needs to be freedom of choice, or said differently, people need to have the opportunity to say no. No, I don't want to come to your service. No, I don't want to come to your talk. No, I don't want to meet other parents. And the second one is we need to be able to have an experience where I can connect with other people, and we can go deeper in that if you like. But what that means it isn't is listen to this guy talk, watch this video, say what you think is your interpretation of this canonical work. Those aren't bad things. They're just not delivering on promise to. And we talked a little bit about campfire experiences. A campfire experience is one place where you're going to get that, the opportunity to connect that. And the third one is we have to grow in some way we want to grow. Or said differently, the experience help us be the person we want to be. Right? So when I go to my church, I want to be in a community of people who are seeking out relationships that are non-transactional. Because when you're generous with people in your church, it's not because you did the calculation and said, oh, it's come back to me, look, I'm winning this one. I want to be connected with other families that want to be supportive in a darn tough time in America and a particularly tough time in the East Bay of the San Francisco area where I live, right? And I want to be a support to other people, including families that are getting through this as well. So if you invite me to a place where I have an intimate experience and we can talk about that and I can learn about what they're struggling with and say, well, gee, I can give you the ride. Well, I can lend you the gear. Well, we can watch the kids. You're allowing me to grow into being that parent, right? And all 3 have to be delivered all the time. And we could experiment, you and me, what happens when we don't deliver in one of those and you see that it's a really lousy experience.
I'm going to jump in here with a reminder that this season of Pastoring in the Digital Parish is being sponsored by a group that takes community building seriously, Safer Sanctuaries. Safer Sanctuaries Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on the trusted policies and procedures that have guided churches for over the past 25 years. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, psychological insights about abuse and abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, which is really important, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan in your church or organization. For Christians, resisting evil and doing justice are ways that we live and serve Jesus Christ. Safer Sanctuaries provides help to do just that by framing this work as a life-giving, community-enhancing, and proactive endeavor. It enables communities to be empowered and flourish as they develop and implement policies and procedures that make everyone safer. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800-972-0433. Check them out and build a little more care and safety into your community. And now let's get back to other principles of community building with Charles Vogl. So I'm imagining the ways that digital ministry can be a supplement to these promises, especially in my purview, the first two promises there, that it is a way to I would have to review what the first promise was, but
the first one is the freedom to say no.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So
and
essentially, like your community
is coercion. So as soon as we're coercing people to participate in our ministry, we failed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So within the digital ministry realm, then, like we are able to let people know who we are in their space. And that is a way to inform them enough of whether they want to say yes to participating or no to communicating or to participating. And then with the second promise of providing that sense of valuable connection, I'm wondering if we can flesh out a little bit more growth there in that. Are there ways where you've seen some communities use digital implements that have provided space for those campfire gatherings or just even to connect in that kind of small group way?
Yeah. So when I advise organizations that want to use digital platforms, what we have to put in place is a cadence of experiences where people understand why they're showing up, again, not being coerced, and they have a general sense of what's bringing people together, right? Because that's the value part, not just my boss told me to be here, or I was told if I don't show up, I won't be a team player, like whatever. And then fairly quickly, we need to break everyone up into groups no bigger than 5. And quite frankly, groups of 2 and 3 are fantastic. And then we need to make those breakouts long enough that they can become comfortable with one another to then generate the kind of conversations that they're not having when they have to manage a greater number of relationships. Right? And I'll just give you an example. I talked to a major tech company you've totally heard of that's very, very famous. And it was during the pandemic, and they reached out to me because they were trying to bring together their teams. And they said, oh, we're doing that. We're putting people on hour-long video calls in groups of 15. And Ryan, you're an adult and you have a computer. You've never been on a video call with 15 people and thought, gee, I can't wait to stay longer on this. It's never happened.
Yeah. And in my experience, somebody who's a fairly type B personality, and like I would disappear.
Exactly
in
right.
That conversation.
Exactly right. So they are like, they have some of the idea, they have like inkling of it, but they're not actually understanding how these things work to then actually execute in a way. And so what it is toxic. People like you, Ryan, are like, I never want to do this again. I'm out of here. And then, of course, the people who are creating it are like, well, gee, it didn't work. We tried it. I'll give you another example. I'm a member of a group of religion scholars, I'll call them. And they knew vaguely that breakouts were a good idea. And so I'm not making this up, Ryan. They put us in breakouts of 2 minutes. And the reason they did that was they were so focused on making sure that the smart talky people had time to talk, that's the time that was left out for breakouts. And they technically had breakouts. Ryan, with people like you and me who have all these questions and all these perspectives and all these curiosities, 2 minutes is enough time to do anything. Because they didn't understand what the breakout was for.
Yeah. I can find out your name and what your family life is like in 2 minutes, and that's about it. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. And then people like me, if I know I got 2 minutes, there's 3 of us on a call, and I do some quick napkin math, and I'm like, oh, we each have less than a minute, I'm going to say largely nothing because I know it's pointless. And so you're just now wasting all of our time. So they understand, and there needs to be a cadence, Ryan, because as I mentioned earlier, we know it just takes more time. So you can't say, we tried it, we did it on Thursday, check, right? There needs to be a series.
Okay.
And if you do make it fun, by the way, all this has to be fun, otherwise people don't come back. If you make it fun and you give people that intimate experience and they know what the values are bringing the other people on the call, well, now you have a shot at success.
All right. Helpful. Well, thank you for tying that together for us, Charles. So for folks who do want to engage with you a little bit more, like, where is a good entry point to get in touch with you? To follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah, to get in touch with me, I have a website. It's charlesvogl.com, charlesvogl.com. And on that site, you'll find several articles I've written that are much shorter than the books. They're easy to access, and I can be contacted. You can also see some of the programs my team offers. And then if the subject interests you, my first book is entitled The Art of Community, 7 Principles for Belonging, and it's everywhere books are sold. And that book was specifically inspired in part by my study of many spiritual traditions and how well and how long they are able to bind people together around shared values and purpose, often through very, very threatening times. And all the lessons that stood out to me that are relevant to our time, I think continue to be relevant, as I distilled them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reason that we're having this conversation today even is that so many members of our audience found that particular book helpful in their practice of ministry. So, so thank you for the book. Thank you for giving this time to clarify some of that stuff for us as well and to apply it directly to our ministries here. Thank you so much. That's going to put a wrap on this session of Pastoring in the Digital Parish. If you want to check out the aforementioned episode, Recommended Reads for Digital Ministers, that's called Recommended Books for Digital Ministry Success. It came out in February of 2023. And another good episode to follow up on this one is called Navigating the Digital Reformation. Ryan Panzer was our adjunct professor for that one, and that session dove into building meaningful practice in the digital culture. Again, I'm Ryan Dunn. I'd like to thank resourceumc.org, the online destination for leaders throughout the United Methodist Church. They make this podcast possible. And of course, they host our website, pastoringinthedigitalparish.com, where you can find more online resources for ministry. Also, I want to thank Safer Sanctuaries for their support. Again, Safer Sanctuaries Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan. Hey, if you want to connect with the Pastoring in the Digital Parish community, check out our Pastoring in the Digital Parish group on Facebook. And you can also send me questions and ideas for future sessions at digitalparish@umcom.org. Another session comes next week. Excited for that. In the meantime, peace to you.